And in this video, what I want to do is get right back onto the recruitment series of videos that I was doing. This is part 3, which is going to be on applications and interviews. And I seem to be bouncing around between sort of informative ones and sort of vloggy type ones. This is an informative one. There's another vloggy type one coming in part 4. So this is the one that looks at the recruitment process in terms of applications, not finding potential recruits, but actually applying to guilds, actually you as the recruitment officer potentially looking at applicants. For raiding guilds this is, and generally speaking for mythic guilds, although some of this may also apply to heroic guilds as well. Now, the way most guilds handle the recruitment process is they get people to fill in an application form. We're sort of no different in a way, though we have 2 different methods. And then select based on the responses given. Now, for me, there are a couple of issues with that. The first one is that most application forms, and ours is no different, contains a mixture of like irrelevant and ambiguous questions. And you sort of think, well, what's the point of a lot of this? And I'm sort of going to go through, and for some of the questions, sure, you actually look at it and you think, well, what is the point of that? The other one is that it's actually possible to be quite a good raider and not be very good at doing application forms. It's the same thing. I always think it's a bit mad for job applications as well. I suppose if there's going to be a lot of applicants for a job, you sort of have to have some sort of form. But there's a lot of people who may not actually be very good or very articulate when it comes to doing forms and being able to make them stand out from the other 50 people who may have applied, although that's probably not so much for a guild, unless you're a very top guild. But they might actually be really good raiders. So there's another little flaw in the system as well. Now, although the forms can be a good way of getting an initial overview, it could be argued, and I'd certainly argue, that voice comms are better. We've recently done a lot more of those where we can as well for applicants, and I'd much prefer those. A lot of the times when someone applies, I see a form, I just scan through it anyway. The key points in it, for me, I'll go through the sort of questions that come up commonly. There are only a few key points I actually want to check out, because most of the rest I will check myself as part of a sort of background check. And the voice comms can handle things a lot better, but I'm going to go over that after I've done the forms. So in terms of application forms first, lots of guilds have sort of subtly different application forms. Some of them, are pretty good, and they'll just say, well, you just write an application form. We're not going to set out the template. You say what you think is important, which is a better way of doing it. But a lot of them just use a standard form, and probably they've copied it off a previous guild as well. So a lot of them are very common. So I'm going to go through the questions that's on ours and talk about, how relevant would the questions be, and some of the ones that maybe don't seem that relevant. Is there maybe some use for it anyway? I mean, I'm not saying necessarily chop these out of your application form if you are a guild that is putting together one. So it's split into different sections. So the first one is personal. So the 3 questions we sort of ask for that is, what is your real life name, age and gender, and where are you from? Now, are those relevant? Not really, no. Real life name, some people might call people by their real life name, but it's more likely called by your character name. Age and gender, does that matter a lot? For some guilds it might. Some guilds it's becoming less the case, I would say, but certainly some years ago, and it still may apply now, some guilds might see you, if you're under 18, as potentially parents could get involved and interfere with the raiding, get them to do stuff, and then you've suddenly got to disappear off, and unreliability issues such as this little example here.
Shit on! Don't you dare say you got that on the front.
Oh yes, oh yes.
There, shout like that.
So, and the gender thing, of course, shouldn't matter either. And the where are you from? The where are you from potentially, actually, because actually, especially in Europe, where it covers a lot of time zones, several time zones in North America. Although I suppose you've also got Oceanic in there, I guess, as well. But knowing whether, let's say you've got someone, you look at it and you think, well, for their time zone, our raid times are not going to be brilliant, are they? So what's the situation there? And it might well be that they say, well, they're out of work at the moment, so they're able to raid those times anyway. Well, what happens when they get a job? Is that going to affect it? Or anything else? Any change in circumstances, would that affect it? So sometimes the where are they from is more than just a social thing, because that's what these questions are about. It's about the social side of it, I would say. So I wouldn't say, oh, they're irrelevant, so cut them out. They're irrelevant from the point of view of the raiding, sort of. But it potentially emphasises the fact that as a guild, you want to be seen as a social unit and not just get on for raids and then when raids are over, bugger off and do your own thing. Now, the next one is actually really important, which is the character. So character questions we ask are current server, character name, race and class, days played, anything to make it shine, link your armory, active off-spec or out, experience on those off-spec or outs. So which ones are important? Okay, character name and character server. This is really important so we can actually find you on logs and things like that. The race and class, ultra important. The race is important because we need to know that you're not a gnome. The class is important because we need to know sort of what you're signing up for. Whether, it doesn't matter what role it is. There's some classes that we might be more keen on getting than others. So that's obviously. But then again, you could also say, do we need to ask for the race and class? Because you've given us the server name and character name. We're obviously going to look you up on the armory, on WoW Progress, on logs. We're going to see that information. So is that relevant? No, we could actually potentially get rid of that. And there are a few questions that we could potentially get rid of. But here's the thing. Sometimes you think on a form, let's say you only put the relevant questions down, it might be quite a small form. I would think, no, put a few more in, because although you can't tell whether someone's a good raider by the quality of the application form they write out, you can tell how motivated they are. Because if they put very little effort into the form, it's a bit of an indication that maybe they're not all that bothered, or maybe they're just filling out loads of applications for loads of different guilds as well. They're certainly not putting a lot of effort into applying to your guild, so it can be an indicator of that. But is race and class important if you've already given the character name and server? No, of course not. Days played, does that matter? Not for me at all. Again, it's another thing you're getting them to do, because what they've got to do, they're filling the form out, they've now got to go into game, type /played and get a number there and put it in. Again, it shows a bit of keenness to actually engage in the process there. Anything to make it shine. These sort of questions are actually really good, because what you don't want are just questions where you can answer it in 1 or 2 words, because that's what some people will do, and it's not necessarily any fault of theirs, but you must ask questions that allow them free rein to talk about something, because that will really tell you, even if they're not very good at forms, it's giving them that opportunity to say, hey, you say something now, and show how keen they are in doing it. And of course, it's not just the effort that they're showing, the actual answer could be illustrative as well. It could explain some things about their character that maybe not obvious from us just looking it up on armory profiles or anything like that as well. Link the armory. That's an irrelevant one as well. I would say either ask for their current server and current name, or ask for the armory link. I don't really think there's a need for both. I would actually prefer them to just link the armory rather than say what server and name it is, because then I've got a link to click and I don't have to type things out myself. That would be brilliant. But do you need both? Again, not really. It can be a bit irrelevant there. Active off-specs or outs. This is obviously of use for raiding. Some raid guilds, of course, want split runs, so they'll want to know about your outs. Obviously, in a situation like this, if you're filling out a form, don't go talking about all your useless outs that are not up to raid standard. If you're not actually going to be able to use them to do anything with the guild, whether it's high-level Mythic Plus or raids, I would say if it's not able to do the raid difficulty below the one you're doing, don't mention it at all. Like if you're a Mythic raiding guild and you're out, maybe it's not Mythic quality, but maybe it's good enough for heroics, you could still put that in, sure, because it wouldn't necessarily take a lot to bung it up there if necessary. But don't put it in there if you wouldn't even get into a normal mode pug. And the same with off specs. Like the number of people who put them down, you look at this, you've no experience of playing it. Like everyone has their off specs, like in Legion especially. Like, I'm a Retribution Paladin. Obviously, I've got a protection spec and a holy spec. No one would ask me to use it. I don't practice with them. I'm no good. So I wouldn't put them down. Because if someone brings me in and brings me into a raid and says, oh, tank's not here. Oh, well, you said your prospect's off spec. Can you tank for us? It's like, yeah, this ain't going to go well at all. So don't be silly. Experience on the off specs or outs is what we ask. Because again, so sometimes what we're having to do, because we know someone will answer a question stupidly at times, or without thinking, shall we say, is a bit fairer, we then ask the follow-up question to really get out of it. What is your experience on these off-specs and outs? Because if it's basically nil, then it's no use to us and we can just disregard the previous answer. But it is probably more sensible just to only talk about relevant experience anyway. So that's in terms of the character. And then what you would do, if I was looking through an application, I would go no further at this point. I would start to investigate that character, look up logs and stuff like that, and find out, get an overview, see where they've been recently as well, make sure they're not guild hopping, Make sure they haven't just been in their previous guild for a suspiciously short time, say 2 weeks, just about long enough to fail a trial, say. Things like that. I might, if I know which guild, sometimes I've actually known the guild have come from, or some people in it, and I've been able to inquire about them on the sly. The next one is about the player in our case. So you as a player. So we ask things like playing times. Playing times are important. This is, obviously we state what our raid times are, and by applying you're saying that you can make those raid times. But what other times are you on? We don't necessarily just want people who are only going to be available for those raid times. What other times are you available, especially now with like Mythic Plus and other things that we want you to be able to do outside of raiding as well, just to get an overall feel for, you know, are you basically on the edge of what you can commit to the game by turning up to the raids? Because if that's the case, then all the peripheral stuff you're going to keep getting behind on. Previous skills, really important. What we don't want here, though, is a list going way back to vanilla. Don't need that. All we need is the last few, your recent experience. The last year or two will be sufficient. You don't have to go mad. Reasons for leaving, of course, we want to know why you've left those guilds, not necessarily just your last guild, but maybe the guild before that as well. Depending on how long you're in it. If you're in your last guild for like 2 years, well, that's plenty. But if you're just in it for a couple of months, then, well, maybe what was the reason you left the one before that as well. And again, what you don't want to do in this one is just completely slag off the guild. It might be that, you know, that's what you're feeling, but you want to be a bit objective about it. Otherwise, you might come across as someone who just blames everyone else for shitty situations. So you want to also think about someone else reading this and what are they going to think about it. Because we don't know, you know, if you say that your guild is really shit and fail to appreciate your unique talents, if we ask the guild or the guild master, they might say, well, they failed trial because they were shit. Or they just didn't turn up, or they kept turning up half an hour late, or they never used consumables or anything like that, or kept ninja pulling, blah, 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 whatever. Who do you believe? You don't know them. They're strangers. So, you know, make it a bit objective, that one. Previous PvE experience. So a lot of people, when I look on applications now, they don't have a great deal of experience. Now, what you could ask here is it relevant? It could be argued no. As a recruitment officer, I actually wouldn't pay that much attention to it. The simple reason that I will do that check myself. Achievements which came in for the Wrath expansion, but they came in the pre-Wrath patch. So a couple of month or maybe about a month before Wrath was released, something like that. And so they've been in the game a long time now. And they're a really, really useful way of finding out what people's actual experience is. Because there are, you know, I sometimes see applications from people who describe themselves as having been a hardcore raider. In fact, I saw one in particular where there's no ambiguity about it. They said they started playing in Wrath. So at that point, you know, right, there's a full set of achievements there. Anything you've done in the game for which there's an achievement is there. And it doesn't need to be on that character either, like raid achievements. It will be there. And then they'll describe themselves as having been a hardcore player. And there's a couple of people where I've looked at that, and I'm looking at their achievements, I'm thinking, no, you're not. You've never actually completed anything at the highest level until perhaps Legion. In fact, you know, there's one person in particular I was looking at a couple of weeks ago, I'm thinking, what they're doing right now with their current guild is by far and away the highest level of progress they've ever achieved in terms of current raiding. And that's not a high level. It's mythic, but that's about all that could be said about it. In one of those guilds that's, you know, stuck on 3 out of 10 that I talked about before. So I would say, as writing it yourself, be a bit sensible about it. But also, as an interview, do we really care about this question? I would put the question in because it's getting them to think about it and to appreciate and to explain what they think is important in terms of their PV experience. But again, don't go back. Don't go, oh, I cleared Molten Core and Blackwing Lair and didn't quite clear Anchorage and did a little bit in Nax, and all the way through to now, 12 years worth of raiding experience. No one needs to know that. If you were in like a top 10 guild in vanilla and then just sort of stopped or went casual and then have just started again recently, maybe you put that in. But don't put the whole lot in. What I would say is put in the last few years of experience in a little bit of detail, not mad, a little bit of detail. Because we can see the dates, we can see what you cleared on time from your achievement stamps. We don't need you to tell us that. Just give us a general, just a paragraph, not even a bloody list. Just an overall viewpoint. But if you did something super brilliant I mean, my best days were in TBC and Vanilla, but I don't really mention them because I don't find them all that relevant now. But maybe some people do. Maybe some recruiters do, and they like that. So put that in if you were really... Oh, dear, knocking things. If you were really, high achiever back then. It was a long time ago, but maybe someone appreciates it. But don't give us a life story. Goodness sake. But as an interviewer, I don't find it... Because I'll find that out myself. This is information that I can find out myself. Then it comes on to performance. Now, this is key. This is crucial. Any questions related to performance are where you will stand out. The previous stuff doesn't really help you stand out much. You're just doing it to show effort, to show that you actually want to join that guild. So you put the effort into the application. Don't just put 1 or 2 word answers where you can actually write a paragraph. But this is where you're going to nail it or not. Describe your role in raids. They don't really want, well, I'm going to do loads of damage, aren't I? That's not what they're after. Describe your role in raids. Now, here is the thing, and this applies to a number of these questions that are coming up. This is very much like if you're applying for a job as well. This is where it comes exactly the same. Whenever you're asked to describe a situation where you are hypothetically working for this company or a raider in this guild, you don't just say in general terms what you do or would do. Give examples of what you have done. So when you're describing your role in raids, obviously what we want in no uncertain terms is that you can maintain high output, whether it be from healing or DPS, or that you don't die but hold aggro as a tank. But also, we want to know that you can do mechanics well. So then you need to get that across. But then you give examples, with proof preferably. You can link to logs showing that you're actually really good at mechanics. Show a part of a fight where it's very easy to pad your numbers, but emphasize that at that part of the fight, when it was very easy to pad your numbers, and maybe some people were doing that, you were focused on the key target. Show that bit of the log. Don't just show the overall damage on the logs. Show that target, that key target, for that key time. That condense the time frame and show, look, there's me, top of damage on that target that had to die right there and then. The next one, explain talents, gear, gems, etc. They don't just want you to copy and paste something from the guide. They want to know that you understand your class. So you can talk about that in a way that, again, relates it to preferably the fights that are current at the moment. So at the moment, we'd be saying Nighthold fights. When Tomb of Sargeras comes out, you would link your use of talents, gear, gems, etc. to particular fights in Tomb of Sargeras to show you've done your homework on that, if you haven't done them already, or if you've already got a few on farm, you know, what you did in those situations. Link logs, it says. So link logs, again, people will just link their Warcraft logs. And that's all it's asking. That's all you have to do. Is that what I would do? No. I would do that. But then what I would do is I would talk about, again, coming back to performance, I would take the initiative and I would talk about, okay, on this fight, this is what I was doing. So you don't, because my overall damage might actually be really high or it might be really low. That all depends on the fight and also my particular role in it. There's some fights where it's really low, but that's because it's really high on key targets where other people are AoE and shit and I'm not. So you need to emphasize that. You say at this time, okay, these people were taking care of those ads. This was my priority target. This is what I made sure I did. And talk about it. And use logs to prove it. Show that you can do more than just look at the damage done tab on the Warcraft log section. Now, at this point, I am going to say that there are quite a lot of officers who don't necessarily know that. In some in reasonable guilds as well. I think they get where they are just because they're lucky and get good players. But if you show that you can use the logs, because some people, you know, you could argue officers will dig around and look at that, but some of them don't. Some of them don't know how to use logs themselves, so you do it for them. Attendance issues, you need to actually say if there's anything that's like to hit your attendance. Obviously, the ideal is that you're going to be there 100% of the time at raid times. This is not always possible, but you need to say what the likelihood you've been off. So for example, with me, there are 5 or 6 nights a year at work where I have to do an evening. And that's not too bad. No one's going to really complain about that. But if, for example, you know that you're going to go on holiday in this period of time, you know that in advance, you put that down, right? And this time I'm going to be on holiday. If you don't know a specific date, but you know you go on holiday a couple of times a year for a week, then you need to say that. Talk about the sort of things that are likely to affect your attendance. And if it's fine by them, then it's fine. And if it's not, well, no one's doing anyone any favours going to that guild because then you'll just be left out. Screenshot of UI and keybinds we asked for. Now, some people just ask for a screenshot of your UI. And this is where a lot of people go wrong. What they do, when they're filling in this form, where are they? They're probably in Dalaran or whatever is the city at that particular expansion. So what do? They go in-game, they log themselves in-game if they weren't already logged in. If they were logged in, they just tab back to the game. And then they take a screenshot and they post that in the forum. That's not what it's asking you to do. I know it's not always clear when it just says screenshot of your UI. But think to yourself this, what useful information is that giving us? Sod all. What we want to see is what your UI looks like during a raid encounter. And the reason for that is some people have... What we want to know is that you have got the relevant information to be able to cope with mythic level mechanics. We also want to know that it doesn't just cover your screen to the point where you can't see anything and will therefore have no idea that you're standing in shit or that a comet is about to smack you in the face. So we want to know that you can see around the area of the screen you need to be able to see around, but in other parts you've got the information that you need. So we want to see boss timers, we want to see, what weak auras or whatever that you've got going there. Anything at all that shows that you've got the information you need, but also the visibility you need. That's what it's asking for. You're not going to get that in Dalaran. Now, some people sort of twig that that's what's wanted, so they still do it in Dalaran, but they just show all their weak auras. Again, that's no use, because then your screen is filled, isn't it? But we don't know what it's like at any one time, so you can't judge that. It's like, well, are those ups at the same time ever, or never? Are they two different fights? I don't know. It's simple enough. And again, just doing that, a bit of an indication you're not taking it seriously. When you're doing an application, you don't have to write it like that. In fact, you shouldn't. You should actually prepare an application and give yourself a fair amount of time to do it, and then actually sleep on it anyway before you hand it in. And then look at it again the next day and try and refine it. So what you do is just sign up for LFR. Just sign up for an LFR, do a fight, get in the middle of the fight, take a screenshot there where it's quite a busy moment of the fight. It doesn't have to be a mythic or heroic or normal. An LFR is fine. We just want to see what it's like in a raid fight. That's all. We just want to see. And then it says keybinds here. Again, is that really relevant? Not unnecessarily. I think this was just... I didn't write this one. I think this was just put in to make sure you have keybinds. Add-ons. Add-ons quite good. Most guilds have a required set of add-ons. So why are we asking what add-ons you use? Well, first of all, just to see how compatible it is with ours. And second of all, just to check how familiar you are with them. Because, if we get someone who's never used add-ons, let's say, their raiding experience is very limited. They've never used add-ons at all. And we're coming in, we're saying, right, you need to use all these add-ons. And they might install them. But if they don't know how to use them, they're not like to have them set up right. And it's actually like to be a hindrance to begin with, rather than help that it's intended to be. So we'll probably ask for the add-ons and what sort of ones you have there as well. It's a useful thing to have. But what is also useful if you're writing out the application is to explain what you get from each of these add-ons. So obviously don't put in add-ons don't put in postal or something like that. If it's not a raid-related add-on, we're not interested in that. We don't want the full list, or like alcoholic or auctioneer or anything like that. We don't need to know about that. What we mean is the ones that are going to be useful in raids. And if you write a little, and it's not asking, it'll just say what add-ons do you have, but again, just stepping out from everyone else, stepping out from the crowd, making yourself look a bit different. Just explain what you get from those add-ons. Then there'll be like technical issues and make sure that your machine can actually cope with Mythic Plus without having to turn everything down to the point where you can't see anything, or Mythic and Mythic raiding as well, I should say. So your computer spec is a very commonly one asked. Is it all that relevant? It depends, doesn't it? Does anyone even know if that's a good spec or not? I don't know what is the minimum spec that will do for the game. I really have no idea personally, but it's a useful one to ask anyway. There's usually at least someone in the guild who understands computers and will say whether that's good enough or not. Speed test, this is fairly important, although it's usually done to the wrong like server point, but your speed test just to check that your connection, your broadband is actually good enough. They'll ask about connection issues. So again, if you keep having connection issues and you've said that you never get connection issues, then it's a bit like you sort of said you didn't. So again, it's just a bit of clarity there. So that is actually quite a relevant one, just to make sure, because if someone says, well, they often lag or something like that in raids, then that's no good, obviously. Microphone enabled to use. Again, this is one way if you do a voice comms interview, you get to find this out. I'm going to talk about that and then. But what is important, of course, is in Mythic, you often you have to be able to listen and follow instructions, of course. But there are times when you have to be able to give information as well. There are some fights where it's absolutely vital that everybody at some point can say something in order to coordinate complex parts of that fight. And that is really important now. So that question will have to be asked. We can't just assume that's the case. Have you got a microphone and are you able to use it? And the last sort of two we talk about is, the next one is motivation. So anything around motivation for joining that guild. So we ask, why do you want to join us? Why should we pick you? And anything else to add. So the why do you want to join us is an awkward question. It's a terrible question. Same in a job interview. It is, why do you want to work here? It's like, because you can't just say, well, because I need some money to pay the bills. It's true, but it's not necessarily endearing yourself compared to others. Same with the raid. It's like, why do you want to join us? Well, because I want to raid and I can't get in anywhere else. Not the best answer, really, is it? So ideally what you want to do, and the other reason why this question is really important from the point of view of the guild is because it's seeing if you can personalize it. Have you just copied and pasted an application and sent it to 20 guilds? Or are you applying to our guild specifically? And this is an indicator. Why do you want to join us? Can you put something down that makes it clear you've done your homework on who we are and what we're like? So the next one is for motivation. Why should we pick you? This is, again, another horrible one. This is another bad one. Again, you're practicing for job interviews if that's going to be a thing. Because they sometimes ask that as well. Why should we employ you? Same as a guild. Why should we pick you? It's a terrible one. So this is one where you've actually got to talk about all the extra things you do. Okay? So, for example, if you're an alchemist with rank 3 in all the flasks and potions, or even just some of them, then you can say that. It might not be related to professions. It might be other little things that you do. If, for example, you're quite good at reading logs, analysing logs, you could say that. Any skills that you have beyond playing the character well, because you've covered that already so far in the application, or you should have done, this is now what are your special skills that are above and beyond what is expected of that class and spec and role. And then anything to add. Again, it's another one of those questions that just lets you say something else, anything else that occurs that hasn't really been covered. Really important to have those sort of questions in an application process. And then the final one is just miscellaneous. It's just the, different guilds will ask different things. They might not ask anything at all. In this particular case, one common one is anyone who can vouch for you that's in the guild. That's always useful because then we can sort of talk to them and see what they think. Often that's not the case, especially if you're applying from off-realm. That won't be the case, and don't worry about that. Just say no. You don't have to say, oh, sadly not, or anything like that. You can if you want. Simple no, because most of the time it is no. How did you hear about us? Useful just from a marketing point of view. Obviously, guilds will try and advertise their open slots in various places. They want to know which ones are giving them the best return. So that's all that is. How can we contact you? Really important, especially off-realm. So what we're going to need is to be able to contact you. And so we need a point of contact, which either could be your battle tag or Skype or something like that. Some way that we can get through to you. And tell you whether you've been successful or not, preferably quickly, because we can't assume even that you'd be online necessarily when we want to try and contact you. So we need something so that we can either see when you're online or just to actually post your message or email or something like that. Now, and that's in terms of our forms. And I think that I don't think other forms, like some might be a bit shorter. I don't think you really get too many longer because that's fairly comprehensive. But again, like I said, the applications form, they can serve a bit of a purpose in terms of gauging someone's keenness to join the guild, as well as it can answer some questions. In particular, the reasons for leaving the guild is one of the ones I highlight on. But what most of the important things are on an application form, I say most, there's a few, but most of the important things you can find out by looking into them. You can find out which past guilds they've been in, even if they've moved realm. There's like census add-ons and things that provide data, and you can look these up on websites to try and track them down. It's not 100% perfect, but often you can track people down. You can try and find out what achievements they've had, so what their raid experience is in reality. Again, you don't just look at whether they've got a kill of a particular mythic or heroic boss from past expansions. You can look at the date they got it. You can also look at how many times they appear to kill it, because that's an indicator of whether they actually progressed through it or whether they just bought a boost. Because someone who, for example, let's say late 2015 got a mythic Archimond kill from Hellfire Citadel, you might go, oh, they did like mythic Hellfire Citadel. Well, maybe they just bought a boost. They've got 1 kill for each boss. Yeah. So you can look at things like that, and you can look at their logs. You're not just going to look at their percentiles or overall damage or output if it's a healer or whatever it is. You can actually look at key facts. You can look at, I'll tell you what's a good thing to look at, and that's you look at their wipes. See how they were doing on their wipes. At the point at which they were about to kill the boss. Maybe early wipes, not so much, but later wipes, when they were about ready to kill the boss, start to look at how they were performing then. That's often a good indicator. But the application form can only take so far, and this is why I would say voice comms interviews are a lot better. You've got that overview, sorry, and you know a bit about them, and they know a bit about you. So then get them on Discord or TeamSpeak or whatever is your voice comms, and actually talk to them. And this will answer a couple of questions as well. Remember early on I said it's really important about the microphone. Have you got a microphone? Can you use it? Here's where you get to find out. Are they clear? Do they understand you? Because you're the ones going to be giving them instructions in raids. Can they understand what you're saying? Particularly in Europe, it's quite important that they can speak, you know, if it's an English-speaking guild especially, can they actually speak that language well enough? Or can they understand it well enough? Because very often it will be a second language for them at least. So how fluent are they? You can also ask them things where they don't have like an hour to think about it like you do on an application form or more. You can ask them straight out the blue questions like, how do you deal, you know, give them scenarios. How would you deal with this? This happens in our guild. What would you do about that? You can ask them, what do you know about the fight? You know, if they're a bit behind you in progress, what do you know about the fights that we've got on farm and you haven't done yet? You know, in other words, do you look ahead? Have you prepared for this? So many things you can do on voice comms that are so much better than application form. And this is the reason why for a job interview, yeah, you have an application form just to weed out the clearly unsuitable people. But then you go for an actual interview before you get the job. And I do think that should be mirrored with guilds in a way that it often isn't, but it is increasingly more so. I think increasingly guilds do want to talk to people, and it's so much easier to do that now. The other thing I would just say, just to finish this off, is if you are applying for a guild or as an officer in a guild, people applying to you, I always think before any application is made, it's a good idea just to have an in-game chat as well. So before if you've decided you want to apply to a guild, actually try and get an officer online. If you don't have their battle tag, sometimes officers will leave their battle tag on WoW Progress or something like that, or on the WoW forums, wherever they've advertised that they're looking for raiders. You can try and contact them there and talk to them. If they're not on your realm and that you haven't got their battle tag, then you could perhaps just create a low-level character on their realm and try and catch them online if you can. But it is a good idea to talk to them, ask them about the guild. Ask them about the atmosphere of the guild, what it's like, how the raiding's going, things like that. Just to establish a rapport, check out a few things, see if it sounds like it's the sort of guild that you'd be interested in joining. And just you from a potential applicant point of view, you can see how serious they might be about recruiting you. You know, is the officer keen to talk to you at length about any of your questions, or are they quite dismissive, that sort of thing as well. So I think that's about it now. I'm going to leave it there. I hope you found it interesting, informative. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.